The sizzling sound of burning flesh filled the air as Officer Jack Thompson pressed the handcuffed pregnant woman's palm against the scorching hood of his police cruiser. Sarah Williams, 8 months pregnant and visibly distressed, had been pulled over for a simple traffic violation. What should have been a routine stop had quickly spiraled into a nightmare. As she writhed in pain, tears streaming down her face, Sarah couldn't have known that this moment of cruelty would set in motion a chain of events that would change lives forever. Officer Thompson stood there, his face a mask of stern indifference. He was so caught up in his display of power that he failed to notice the man across the street, watching the scene unfold with growing horror and rage. This witness wasn't just any bystander, he was Michael Williams, Sarah's husband, and a newly appointed major in the police force. The day had started like any other for Sarah. She was on her way to her final prenatal checkup, excited to hear her baby's heartbeat one last time before the big day. The sun was shining, and she hummed along to her favorite song on the radio. She never imagined that a simple drive would end with her hand being burned by the very people sworn to protect and serve. As Sarah's cries echoed through the busy street, passers-by began to stop and stare. Some pulled out their phones, recording the incident with shaking hands. Others shouted at Officer Thompson to stop, their voices a mix of anger and disbelief. But the officer seemed deaf to their pleas, focused only on what he saw as defiance from Sarah. "I told you to keep your hands where I can see them," Thompson barked, pressing Sarah's hand harder against the burning metal. "This is what happens when you don't follow orders." Sarah tried to explain through her sobs that she was only reaching for her ID as he had asked, but her words fell on deaf ears. The pain was unbearable, and she feared not just for herself, but for her unborn child. The stress of the situation was causing her to feel contractions, adding to her panic. Across the street, Michael Williams stood frozen in shock. He had just left the precinct, still adjusting to his new role as a major, when he spotted the commotion. At first, he didn't recognize his wife in the crowd, but as he drew closer, the horrifying reality hit him like a punch to the gut. His training told him to approach calmly, to de-escalate the situation, but seeing his pregnant wife in pain, subjected to such unnecessary cruelty, made his blood boil. He started to cross the street, his hand instinctively reaching for the badge in his pocket. As the scene unfolded, bystanders continued to gather. Among them was a local news reporter who happened to be in the area. She quickly began a live broadcast, ensuring that this incident wouldn't be swept under the rug. "We'll live at the corner of Main and Elm," the reporter said into her microphone, her voice tense, "where an officer appears to be using excessive force on a visibly pregnant woman. Witnesses say the woman was pulled over for a routine traffic stop. We caution viewers that the following footage may be disturbing." The lives of everyone involved were about to change dramatically. Officer Thompson, so sure of his authority and righteousness, had no idea that his actions were being broadcast live across the city. He couldn't have known that the woman he was mistreating was married to one of his superiors, or that this incident would spark a fierce debate about police conduct and racial bias. Sarah, through her pain, clung to the hope that someone would intervene. She thought of her baby, praying that the stress wouldn't harm her child. She thought of Michael, wishing he were here to protect her, unaware that he was just moments away from confronting Officer Thompson. As for Michael, a storm of emotions raged within him. Anger at the officer hurting his wife, fear for Sarah and their unborn child, and a deep, gnawing conflict between his duty as a police major and his instinct as a husband and father-to-be. In those few seconds, as he approached the scene, he knew that whatever he did next would have far-reaching consequences for his career, his family, and potentially the entire police department. The air was thick with tension, the scene poised on a knife's edge. Officer Thompson's actions had set in motion a series of events that would challenge everyone's assumptions about justice, power, and redemption. As Michael finally reached the police cruiser, his voice cutting through the chaos, the story of Officer Thompson's harsh lesson in empathy and accountability was only just beginning. Little did anyone know, this incident would become a turning point, not just for those directly involved, but for the entire community. It would spark conversations about racial bias, police reform, and the importance of empathy in law enforcement. The video of Sarah's ordeal would go viral, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about the system they relied on for protection. For Officer Thompson, this moment marked the beginning of a difficult journey, one that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about his role as a police officer and his place in society. The consequences of his actions would ripple out, touching lives far beyond the street corner, and ultimately leading to a profound transformation that no one could have predicted. As Michael finally reached his wife, their eyes met in a moment of shared pain and determination. This was more than just a case of police brutality. It was a catalyst for change, a stark reminder that justice must be tempered with compassion, and that true strength lies not in exerting power over others, but in standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. The stage was set for a story of conflict, redemption, and the power of human connection to overcome prejudice and heal deep-seated wounds. As the first sirens of approaching backup began to wail in the distance, everyone present knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Jack Thompson hadn't always wanted to be a police officer. As a child, he dreamed of becoming a firefighter, inspired by the brave men and women who saved lives and were hailed as heroes. But life had other plans for young Jack, and a series of events shaped him into the man he would become. Growing up in a small, predominantly white town in the Midwest, Jack's worldview was limited. His father, a strict military veteran, instilled in him a rigid sense of discipline and respect for authority. "There are rules for a reason, Jack," his father would often say. "Follow them, and you'll never go wrong." Jack's mother, a quiet, submissive woman, never challenged her husband's harsh parenting style. She would often comfort Jack after his father's stern lectures, whispering, "Your father just wants what's best for you. The world is a dangerous place, and we need to be prepared." As a teenager, Jack excelled in sports, particularly football. He was the captain of his high school team, known for his aggressive playing style and unwavering dedication to winning. His coach praised him for his no-nonsense attitude and ability to follow instructions to the letter. This reinforced Jack's belief that strict adherence to rules and authority was the key to success. Jack's life took a turn when his older brother Tom joined the army right out of high school. Tom was Jack's hero, and he eagerly awaited his brother's letters from boot camp. But 6 months into Tom's first deployment, the Thompson family received the news that would change their lives forever. Tom had been killed in action. The loss hit Jack hard. He watched his father retreat further into his shell, becoming even more rigid and unyielding. His mother seemed to fade away, lost in her grief. Jack, feeling angry and helpless, decided that he needed to do something to honor his brother's memory and protect others from experiencing such loss. It was then that Jack decided to join the police force. He saw it as a way to serve his community, to be the shield that protected the innocent from harm. He threw himself into his training with the same intensity he had shown on the football field. At the police academy, Jack's instructors noted his dedication and physical prowess. However, they also observed his tendency to see things in black and white, with little room for nuance. One instructor wrote in his evaluation, "Cadet Thompson shows great potential, but may struggle with situations requiring flexibility and empathy." Jack graduated near the top of his class and was quickly assigned to patrol one of the tougher neighborhoods in the city. It was a far cry from the small town he grew up in, and the diversity of the urban landscape was initially overwhelming for him. In his early years on the force, Jack's rigid worldview was challenged time and time again. He saw poverty, drug addiction, and crime up close, but struggled to understand the complex social and economic factors at play. Instead, he fell back on what he knew: strict enforcement of the law, no exceptions. Jack's approach earned him praise from some of his superiors, who saw him as a no-nonsense cop who got results. But it also led to complaints from community members who felt he was overly aggressive and lacked empathy. Jack dismissed these complaints, believing that he was doing his job exactly as he should. As the years went by, Jack's reputation grew. Some officers admired his dedication and by-the-book approach. Others worried about his inability to connect with the community he served. Jack remained convinced that his way was the right way, that showing any weakness or flexibility would only lead to chaos. He prided himself on treating everyone the same, with stern, unwavering enforcement of the law. In Jack's mind, this was true equality. He failed to see how his approach might affect different communities differently, or how his own biases might be influencing his actions. Jack's personal life suffered as a result of his rigid worldview. His marriage ended in divorce after just 3 years, with his ex-wife citing his inability to compromise or show emotional vulnerability. He had few close friends, spending most of his free time alone or with fellow officers who shared his strict views. Despite these setbacks, Jack remained convinced that he was on the right path. He saw the world as a battleground between order and chaos, and he was determined to be on the front lines, enforcing order at any cost. It was this mindset that Jack brought with him on that fateful day when he pulled over Sarah Williams. In his eyes, every traffic stop was a potential threat, every citizen a possible criminal. He couldn't see the pregnant woman in distress. He only saw someone he perceived as defying his authority. As he pressed Sarah's hand against the hot hood of his cruiser, Jack believed he was doing his job, maintaining order, and teaching a lesson about respect for the law. He was so entrenched in his beliefs that he couldn't see the horror of his actions, couldn't hear the pleas of the bystanders, couldn't feel the wrongness of what he was doing. Little did Jack know that this incident would be the beginning of a journey that would force him to confront his deepest beliefs and biases. The rigid world he had constructed for himself was about to shatter, and in its place, a new understanding would have to be built, one painful realization at a time. As the scene unfolded, with Michael Williams approaching and the crowd growing more agitated, Jack Thompson stood at a crossroads. His next actions would not only determine the immediate outcome of this situation, but would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about justice, empathy, and what it truly means to protect and serve. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change lives, challenge an entire system, and ultimately lead to a profound transformation, not just for Jack Thompson, but for an entire community grappling with issues of race, power, and justice. The morning sun beat down on Officer Jack Thompson as he patrolled the streets of his assigned neighborhood. His cruiser moved slowly, his keen eyes scanning every corner, every face, looking for any sign of trouble. To Jack, the world was full of potential threats, and it was his job to neutralize them before they could cause harm. As he turned onto Main Street, Jack noticed a car rolling through a stop sign. It wasn't a blatant violation. The driver had slowed down, but hadn't come to a complete stop. On any other day, Jack might have let it slide, but today, he felt on edge. Something in the air made him feel like he needed to assert his authority. He flipped on his lights and sirens, pulling the car over to the side of the road. As he approached the vehicle, he noted it was an older model, a bit run down. In Jack's mind, this already painted a picture of the type of person he was dealing with, someone who didn't respect the rules, who cut corners. License and registration. Jack barked as he reached the driver's window. He barely looked at the woman behind the wheel, his mind already made up about the kind of interaction this would be. Sarah Williams, 8 months pregnant and feeling the strain of her condition, fumbled in her purse for her wallet. "I'm so sorry, officer," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I came to a full stop. I'm just a little distracted today. I'm heading to my final prenatal checkup." Jack's jaw tightened. Excuses. That's all he ever heard. Everyone had a reason for breaking the law, but to him, there was no excuse. Rules were rules. "Ma'am, the law doesn't make exceptions for doctor's appointments," he said coldly. "Now, I need to see your license and registration." Sarah nodded, still searching through her bag. Her hands were shaking now, picking up on the officer's hostile tone. She found her license and handed it over, then reached across to the glove compartment for her registration. As Sarah stretched, Jack's hand instinctively moved to his weapon. The sudden movement had triggered his ever-present sense of danger. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he shouted. Sarah froze, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm just getting my registration," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Step out of the vehicle," Jack demanded, his voice hard and brooking no argument. Confused and frightened, Sarah struggled to comply. Her pregnant belly made it difficult to maneuver out of the car quickly. To Jack, her slow movements seemed like defiance, further cementing his belief that she was trouble. As Sarah finally managed to stand beside her car, Jack's frustration grew. In his mind, this simple traffic stop was escalating, and it was all her fault. He didn't see a pregnant woman in distress. He saw a potential threat that needed to be controlled. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Jack ordered. "But why?" Sarah asked, tears forming in her eyes. "I haven't done anything wrong." Jack's patience snapped. In one swift motion, he spun Sarah around and cuffed her hands behind her back. The metal dug into her wrists, causing her to cry out in pain. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Passers-by slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold with a mix of curiosity and concern. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something wasn't right about the situation. Jack, hyper-aware of the growing audience, felt the need to assert his control even more. He began to pat Sarah down, ignoring her protests and the whispers from the onlookers. "Please," Sarah begged, "I'm pregnant. You're hurting me." But Jack wasn't listening. In his mind, he was following procedure, doing what needed to be done to maintain order. He couldn't see past his training, past his biases, to recognize the unnecessary cruelty of his actions. As he finished the pat-down, Jack roughly guided Sarah towards his cruiser. The hood of the car had been sitting in the sun all morning, its metal surface hot to the touch. Jack didn't notice, or perhaps didn't care. "Lean against the car," he commanded, pushing Sarah forward. Sarah's instincts kicked in. She tried to pull back, to protect her unborn child from the heat she could feel radiating from the car's hood. "No, please," she cried. "It's too hot." To Jack, this was the last straw. This woman had run a stop sign, been slow to provide her documents, and now she was actively resisting. In his mind, he needed to show her, and everyone watching, what happened when you defied a police officer. With a surge of misplaced righteousness, Jack pressed Sarah's hand against the scorching hood of the cruiser. The sound of sizzling flesh cut through the air, followed immediately by Sarah's agonized scream. Time seemed to stand still in that moment. The gathered crowd gasped in horror. Phones captured the scene from every angle. And across the street, Michael Williams, Sarah's husband and newly appointed police major, felt his world tilt on its axis. As Sarah's cries echoed down the street, the consequences of Jack's actions hung in the air like a thundercloud ready to burst. In his blind adherence to his warped sense of duty, he had crossed a line that would change everything, for himself, for Sarah and Michael, and for the entire community. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge deep-seated beliefs, expose hidden biases, and ultimately pave the way for profound change. As Michael began to cross the street, his face a mask of shock and fury. The true impact of Jack's actions was about to unfold in ways that no one could have predicted. Sarah Williams had always been a beacon of kindness in her community. At 32 years old, she worked as a kindergarten teacher, dedicating her life to nurturing young minds and hearts. Her colleagues often joked that Sarah had enough love to fill an ocean, and now, 8 months pregnant, she was eager to shower that love on her first child. That morning, Sarah woke up with a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was the day of her final prenatal checkup before her due date. As she got ready, she couldn't help but smile at her reflection in the mirror, her hand resting gently on her swollen belly. "Just a few more weeks, little one," she whispered, feeling a flutter of movement in response. Sarah's husband, Michael, had already left for work. He'd recently been promoted to major in the police force, a position that filled Sarah with pride, but also meant longer hours for Michael. As she prepared to leave, she found a note he'd left on the kitchen counter. "Good luck at the appointment, my loves. Can't wait to hear all about it tonight. M." Sarah tucked the note into her purse, feeling a warm glow of affection for her husband. Despite the challenges of his job, Michael always found ways to show he cared. As she drove to her appointment, Sarah's mind wandered to the future. She imagined bringing her baby to her kindergarten class, introducing the child to the joys of learning. She thought about family picnics in the park, teaching her little one to ride a bike, and all the precious moments that lay ahead. Lost in these happy thoughts, Sarah didn't notice that she had rolled through a stop sign until she saw the police lights flashing behind her. Her heart sank. She'd always been a careful driver, especially since becoming pregnant. How could she have been so careless? As she pulled over, Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "It's okay," she told herself. "Just explain the situation. Any reasonable person would understand." But as Officer Thompson approached her car, Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The officer's face was set in hard lines, his eyes cold and unforgiving. Sarah's instincts told her that this wasn't going to be a simple interaction. When Officer Thompson barked his command for her license and registration, Sarah's hands began to shake. She fumbled through her purse, her pregnant belly making it awkward to move. She could feel the officer's impatience growing with each passing second. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "I'm just a little nervous. I'm on my way to my final prenatal checkup." She looked up at Officer Thompson, hoping to see some softening in his expression, some hint of understanding. Instead, his face seemed to harden even more. As the situation escalated, Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not when she was so close to meeting her baby. She tried to explain, tried to comply with the officer's increasingly aggressive demands, but it seemed that nothing she did was right. When Officer Thompson ordered her out of the car, Sarah's fear reached new heights. She struggled to maneuver her pregnant body out of the vehicle, acutely aware of how vulnerable she was. Tears began to form in her eyes, not just from fear for herself, but for her unborn child. "Please," she begged, "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm pregnant. Please don't hurt my baby." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. As Officer Thompson roughly handcuffed her, Sarah felt a pain shoot through her abdomen. Was it a contraction? Was the stress putting her baby in danger? The thought filled her with terror. The crowd gathering around them only added to Sarah's distress. She could hear murmurs of concern, see people recording with their phones. She felt exposed, humiliated, and utterly helpless. When Officer Thompson pushed her towards his cruiser, Sarah's survival instincts kicked in. She could feel the heat radiating from the hood of the car. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to protect her unborn child from that scorching metal. "No, please," she cried out. "It's too hot." But her resistance only seemed to anger Officer Thompson further. In a moment that would be seared into Sarah's memory forever, he pressed her hand against the burning hood of the car. The pain was immediate and intense. Sarah screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed down the street. In that moment of excruciating pain, her thoughts weren't for herself, but for her baby. Had the shock and stress harmed her child? Would this incident rob her of the future she had been dreaming of just minutes ago? As Sarah's cries filled the air, she suddenly caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Michael, her husband. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Sarah saw a whirlwind of emotions cross his face. Shock, horror, and then a determination that she recognized all too well. Despite her pain, despite her fear, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Michael was here. He would understand. He would make this right. As he began to cross the street towards her, Sarah clung to that hope, praying that this nightmare would soon be over, and that her baby, their baby, would be safe. The scene was set for a confrontation that would change lives and challenge an entire system. And at the center of it all was Sarah, a kind-hearted teacher, an expectant mother, a woman who had done nothing to deserve the cruelty she was enduring. Her pain, her fear, and her unwavering concern for her unborn child would become the emotional heart of a story that was about to shake a community to its core. Wow, folks. We've just witnessed an incredibly intense and emotional situation unfold. Before we continue with this gripping story, I want to take a moment to connect with all of you who are watching. This story of Sarah and Officer Thompson touches on some deeply important issues in our society, issues of power, prejudice, and justice. It's the kind of story that can make us feel angry, sad, or even helpless. But it's also a story that reminds us of the power of empathy and the potential for change. I'm curious to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Whether you're in a big city or a small town, in the United States or halfway across the world, your perspective matters. Has this story resonated with you so far? Maybe you've experienced something similar, or perhaps you know someone who has. Or maybe this is opening your eyes to experiences very different from your own. Whatever your thoughts, we want to hear them. Drop a comment below letting us know where you're tuning in from. Share your initial reactions to Sarah's situation. What emotions did her story bring up for you? Do you see parallels to events in your own community? Your engagement helps us create content that matters to you. If this story has impacted you, please consider subscribing to our channel. By doing so, you're not just supporting us, you're joining a community of people who care about these important issues and want to see positive change in the world. Remember, every view, every comment, every subscription is a voice saying that these stories matter, that justice matters, that empathy matters. As we continue with Sarah's story and see how this situation unfolds, keep those comments coming. Your thoughts and experiences add depth to this conversation and remind us that behind every story, there are real people, real emotions, and real opportunities for change. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for caring. Now let's get back to the story and see what happens next as Michael, Sarah's husband and a police major, enters the scene. The confrontation we're about to witness could change everything, not just for Sarah and Officer Thompson, but for their entire community. Stay tuned, keep those comments coming, and let's continue this journey together. As Michael Williams stormed across the street towards his wife and Officer Thompson, the air crackled with tension. Bystanders held their breath, sensing that a pivotal moment was about to unfold. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Michael's voice boomed, causing Officer Thompson to spin around. The recognition in Thompson's eyes was immediate. He knew exactly who Michael was. "Major Williams?" Thompson began, but Michael cut him off. "That's my wife you just assaulted, Thompson, my pregnant wife." Michael's voice was low and dangerous. "Step away from her, now." The crowd murmured in shock. Phones captured every second of the confrontation, live streaming it across social media platforms. Within minutes, the incident was going viral. Officer Thompson's face drained of color as the gravity of his actions began to sink in. He had just manhandled and injured the wife of his superior officer, a pregnant woman, in front of dozens of witnesses. His mind raced, trying to find a way to justify his actions, but he came up empty. As Michael tended to Sarah, carefully removing the handcuffs and examining her burned hand, more police cars arrived on the scene. News vans weren't far behind. The incident was quickly spiraling beyond Thompson's control. Officer Thompson, one of the newly arrived sergeants, said, "I'm going to need you to surrender your badge and weapon. You're suspended pending a full investigation." Thompson's world seemed to tilt on its axis. In all his years on the force, he had never been suspended. He had always believed that his strict adherence to rules protected him from such consequences. Now, as he handed over his badge and gun, he felt naked, exposed. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The video of the incident spread like wildfire across the internet. News outlets picked up the story, running it with headlines like "Pregnant Teacher Burned by Overzealous Cop" and "Police Brutality Hits Close to Home for Department Major." Thompson couldn't escape the fallout. His face was plastered across every local news channel. When he ventured out for groceries, he could feel the stares of other shoppers, hear their whispers. "That's him," they'd say. "The cop who burned the pregnant lady." The police department moved quickly to distance itself from Thompson's actions. A press conference was held where the chief of police condemned the incident in no uncertain terms. "The actions of Officer Thompson do not reflect the values of our department," the chief stated. "We are committed to serving and protecting all members of our community, regardless of race, gender, or any other factor." As the days passed, more details about Thompson's record came to light. Journalists dug into his history, uncovering a pattern of complaints about his aggressive behavior, particularly towards minorities. Each new revelation was another nail in the coffin of Thompson's career. The mayor's office announced a full review of police training and procedures. Community leaders called for sweeping reforms. Thompson found himself at the center of a national conversation about police brutality and racial bias in law enforcement. A week after the incident, Thompson was called into a meeting with the department's Internal Affairs Division. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Multiple video angles of the incident, dozens of witness statements, and Sarah Williams' medical records all painted a damning picture. Officer Thompson, the IA investigator said, her voice stern, "Do you understand the severity of your actions? You used excessive force on a visibly pregnant woman who posed no threat. You caused her physical harm and put her unborn child at risk. Can you explain your reasoning?" Thompson opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in his career, he couldn't fall back on his usual justifications. The rules he had clung to so tightly, the black and white worldview that had defined his approach to policing, none of it could explain away what he had done. As he sat there, unable to defend his actions, Thompson felt something he hadn't experienced in years: doubt. Had he been wrong all this time? Had his rigid adherence to rules blinded him to the human element of his job? The meeting ended with Thompson being informed that he would face a disciplinary hearing. The likely outcome, they told him, was termination from the force. His career, the identity he had built for himself over years of service, was crumbling before his eyes. That night, alone in his apartment, Thompson couldn't sleep. The image of Sarah Williams' face contorted in pain haunted him. For the first time, he allowed himself to see her not as a threat or a rule breaker, but as a person, a pregnant woman on her way to a doctor's appointment, whose life he had traumatized. As dawn broke, Thompson made a decision. He couldn't undo what he had done, but perhaps he could start to make amends. He picked up his phone and, with shaking hands, dialed the number for Sarah and Michael Williams. The path ahead would be long and difficult. Thompson would have to confront his biases, challenge his long-held beliefs, and face the consequences of his actions. But as he listened to the phone ring, waiting for someone to pick up, he felt the first stirrings of something new, a desire to understand, to learn, and perhaps, someday, to earn forgiveness. The karma that had hit Officer Thompson wasn't just about losing his job or facing public scrutiny. It was about the painful but necessary process of self-reflection and change that lay ahead. As he prepared to take the first step on this journey, Thompson realized that the true measure of justice might not be in punishment, but in transformation. The months following the incident were the most challenging of Jack Thompson's life. Stripped of his badge and the identity he had clung to for so long, he was forced to confront the man he had become and the man he wanted to be. His call to the Williams family had been a turning point. To his surprise, Michael had agreed to meet with him, albeit under strict conditions. That first meeting was tense and emotional. Jack struggled to find the words to express his remorse, while Michael fought to contain his anger. "I don't expect forgiveness," Jack had said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. I was wrong, and I want to do whatever I can to make things right." Michael's response was measured but firm. "Words aren't enough, Thompson. If you're serious about making amends, you need to show it through your actions." Taking Michael's words to heart, Jack embarked on a journey of education and self-improvement. He enrolled in implicit bias training, attended community meetings, and volunteered at local organizations serving minority communities. Each experience chipped away at the rigid worldview he had held for so long. One pivotal moment came when Jack volunteered at a community center in the neighborhood he had once patrolled. There, he met Marcus, a young black man who had had his own run-ins with the law. As they worked side by side, painting walls and fixing furniture, Marcus shared stories of his experiences with police. The fear, the frustration, the feeling of being seen as a threat rather than a person. For the first time, Jack truly listened. He began to see how his actions, which he had always justified as just doing his job, had impacted real people with real lives. The realization was painful, but it was also the catalyst for genuine change. As weeks turned into months, Jack's transformation became noticeable to those around him. He spoke less and listened more. He sought out perspectives different from his own. Slowly, tentatively, he began to build bridges with the community he had once viewed with suspicion. Sarah Williams' baby was born healthy, a bright spot in the aftermath of the traumatic incident. When Jack heard the news, he sent a heartfelt letter of congratulations along with a donation to a local organization supporting expectant mothers in underserved communities. A year after the incident, Jack was invited to speak at a police academy training session on community relations. Standing before a room of fresh-faced cadets, he shared his story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a call for empathy, understanding, and continuous self-reflection. The badge doesn't make you infallible, he told them. It's a responsibility to serve and protect all members of your community. That means confronting your own biases, questioning your assumptions, and always striving to see the humanity in others. As he finished his speech, Jack noticed Michael Williams standing at the back of the room. Their eyes met, and Michael gave a small nod, not quite forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of the journey Jack had undertaken. Jack knew that his path to redemption was far from over. The harm he had caused couldn't be erased, but he was committed to spending the rest of his life working to create positive change. He had learned the hard way that true strength lay not in enforcing rules blindly, but in having the courage to admit mistakes and the willingness to grow. As our story comes to a close, we're left with a powerful reminder of the potential for change that exists within each of us. Jack Thompson's journey from a rigid, rule-bound officer to a more empathetic, self-aware individual shows us that it's never too late to learn and grow. This story touched on critical issues of police conduct, racial bias, and the importance of community relations. It reminded us that behind every interaction, there are human beings with their own stories, fears, and hopes. We've seen how a single incident can ripple out, affecting not just individuals, but entire communities. We've witnessed the pain caused by unchecked biases and the healing that can begin when we open ourselves to new perspectives. As we end this tale, I encourage you to reflect on your own biases and assumptions. How might they be affecting your interactions with others? What steps can you take to broaden your understanding and increase your empathy? Remember, change starts with each one of us. By striving to see the humanity in everyone we meet, by being willing to listen and learn, we can all contribute to creating a more just and compassionate world. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing it with others. Your engagement helps spread these important messages and keeps the conversation going. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking stories that challenge us to see the world from new perspectives. Until next time, keep an open mind, a compassionate heart, and never stop believing in the power of change.